chapter 17 today. 1 Kings chapter 17. And during the intermittent times when Dr. Sherritt is gone, I've decided that over the next however long it takes that we're going to go over the life of some Old Testament people, and we're going to talk about Elijah again this morning. Now, his story is found in 1st and 2nd Kings. 1st and 2nd Kings are really in the Hebrew Bible were part of one book and was a follow-up to 1st and 2nd Samuel. And the idea behind 1st and 2nd Kings is this. How did we get from point A to point B? Point A is David, who is a man after God's own heart, who had this amazing rule. He passes the baton when he's about to die to his son Solomon. God comes to Solomon and says, I will give you anything you want in the world. You just ask me for what it is, because I am in your corner. I am with you. Solomon, what do you want? And Solomon asks for what? Wisdom. And God says, that's the right answer, because you asked for wisdom and not riches, land, and all this other stuff. I will give you not only the wisdom and make you the wisest man ever to walk the face of the earth, you are going to have this tremendous kingdom. The land had expanded. He ruled during a golden age. And then the next thing that we see Solomon doing is he has built a permanent place of worship where heaven and earth collide in the temple in Jerusalem. And he built it, he dedicated it, and God's presence in the form of a cloud when they dedicated came and rested on there. Everything was going great at the beginning of 1 Kings. In the end of 2 Kings, this kingdom was divided into north and south, fractured. The Assyrian Empire had destroyed the northern 10 tribes of Israel. And then Babylon had come and was invading and carrying part of the population to captivity in Babylon. And so 1st and 2nd Kings largely answer the question, well, how did this all go so wrong? And the simple answer is that God's people were unfaithful to him. Specifically, they disobeyed the first two of the Ten Commandments. Well, more than that. But God said, you should only worship me and not worship these other gods that are going to be worshipped by other people in the land in which you are heading. And they worshipped him. They worshipped them anyway. And particularly the ones that were the most common that they worshipped instead of God were two Canaanite fertility gods. One was called Baal, which anyone who's read the Bible, the Old Testament, is familiar with who Baal is. And the other was the female counterpart to Baal called Asherah. And the idea behind them was that if you worship them, Baal and Asherah, they will make the land and your family fertile, meaning your crops will grow, your livestock will reproduce, which is a valuable financial commodity, and even your family will grow. You'll have kids, which was to your financial benefit then. And the specific king who worshipped Baal at the time of Elijah was named Ahab. Now, if we back up to chapter 16, verse 30, it describes Ahab this way. 16:30. Now he was in a line of kings who were unfaithful to God. It says, and Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord, more than all who were before him. Then down in verse 32 and 33 of chapter 16 it says, he erected an altar to Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. And Ahab made an Asherah. Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than all the kings who were before him. So not only was he worshiping Baal, but he says, I'm going to build Baal a temple. I'm going to make a statue of him, and I'm going to worship him there. And so he was this bad guy. Elijah comes onto the scene, And in the beginning of chapter 17, which we talked about a month or so ago, God tells Elijah, I want you to go to Ahab, and I want you to give him my message. There is going to be a drought in the land until I say that the drought is over. Which struck right at the heart of Baal. They believe who gave them rain when they were worshiping Baal? Baal, right? God says, if you think Baal's going to give you rain, let's see what he can do when I say what's going to happen. And so Elijah obeys. He relays this message to Ahab that it wasn't going to rain until Elijah prayed to God, and then God would make it rain. It would bring about a crippling drought. He was giving a message that was not just difficult to hear, because let's face it, how many of you like having awkward conversations with people? No one. Think about what lengths you go to avoid awkward conversations with people. There was a guy that lived in Virginia. I didn't know him, but when I bumped into him, he wanted to talk to me about his understanding of the book of Revelation. The first 2 times I saw him at a Subway, and then I saw him at Walmart. And one time I saw him walking towards me, and I recognized him, and I ran the other way to avoid talking to this guy, right? So you say, well, boy, you can imagine Elijah. I don't want to. I do not. He does probably not want to have this awkward conversation with Ahab. Keep in mind that Ahab is the most powerful person in the country. He's the king. So you could come up with a lot of reasons to yourself why you shouldn't do it, why you wouldn't do it, but Elijah is faithful to what God tells him to do. And after he gives this message, he flees to this wilderness east of the Jordan River, where he drinks from a brook, and ravens bring him food during the drought. One of the things that I want to reiterate before we get into what happens next is what James says about Elijah. He says, Elijah is a man or human being just like us. So it's easy to look at Elijah talking to the king, being fed by birds, miraculous provision, God speaking to him directly and saying, this person is nothing like me. It's sort of like, I play flag football, and it's like saying I'm a member of the Cincinnati Bengals, right? I play pee-wee basketball. This Bible story is more like the NCAA. These things do not compare. They're apples and oranges. But James tells us, yes, you are just like Elijah in all the ways that matter. And so what I would say is that while we may not have the same results that Elijah did, I've never met the President of the United States, probably never will, and never been asked by God to give any political leader bad news. But we can all be faithful in what God wants us to do. If God tells you to do X, I'm going to do X. If God tells me to do Y, I'm going to do Y. We can have the same process without having the same results. So we pick up in chapter 17, verse 8. We're going to read down through verse 16 here. See what happens to him next. The word of the Lord came to him and said, Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to feed you. So he arose and went to Zarephath, and when they come to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks. And he called her and said, Bring me a little water in a vessel that I may drink. And she was going to bring it, and as she was going to bring it, he called to her and said, Bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. And she said, As the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. And I am now gathering a couple of sticks that I may go and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. And Elijah said to her, Do not fear, Go and do as you have said, but first make me a little cake of it and bring it to me, and afterward make some for yourself and your son. For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not be spent, and the jug of oil shall not be empty until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the earth. And she went and did as Elijah said, and she and her household ate for many days. And the jar of flour was not spent, neither did the jug of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by Elijah. The same principle that was happening in before with Elijah was still applying now, just in different circumstances. When he was living in the wilderness by himself, he was trusting on God to sustain him completely. He sat by a little brook and got water to drink that gave him water, and then birds were miraculously bringing him food to eat. When the brook dries up, he says, you're going to go and you're going to stay with this woman, this widow in Zarephath, which this town was about 100 miles away from where he was. And this widow is going to take care of your food and water needs. Now, I would say that it is hard for us to imagine getting your food from day to day. Or even like from day to day relying on I work, I get money, I provide for my needs, and then I go to bed with nothing. That is how most people largely live back in the Bible times. And so this idea of I am going to trust God to sustain my daily needs. Because in the Lord's Prayer, Jesus tells his disciples to pray, give us this day our what? Daily bread. And that's hard to imagine, but there are situations where some people have to trust God in this sort of like, I don't know what the next 24 hours holds, and so I'm going to have to trust God. And the message is, when you trust God, he will provide for all of your needs. Jamie grew up in Ocean View Church of Christ in Ocean View, Delaware, and there is a interesting thing about that church in that they send a lot of people to Bible college to become ministers, but they just don't send 18-year-old kids who are deciding what to do. They will somehow convince guys like in the middle of their lives, 30s, families getting careers established, to quit their jobs, go down to my alma mater, Mid-Atlantic Christian University, go to school there for 4 years and become ministers. It's a pretty interesting thing. I can think of 3 off the top of my head, which was one of them was my mentor when I was in college. His name was Ron Stewart, and so Ron, I forget what he did beforehand, but he tells this story about when he was visiting home one weekend. It's about 4 miles up the Atlantic coast to get from North Carolina to Delaware. And to make ends meet, he was working at Captain D's Seafood. Is there Captain D's around here? It's like a fast food seafood place. He was working at Captain D's, taking a full class load. He had 3 young kids at the time. They're like preschool, early elementary, and so it's interesting. I can remember being a poor college student and digging through the cushions to find a Mountain Dew on a Sunday night. Like, I can't imagine doing it with 3 kids. And so he managed to have a chance off work to drive home, visit his hometown of Delaware with his 3 little kids. He went to Ocean View Church of Christ in their evening service. For some reason, he had missed church that morning. It may have been that he was in the National Guard, and he was fulfilling that commitment that weekend. But long story short, he comes and he goes to church at his home church on Sunday night, and they do this thing. Instead of passing communion around to everyone, they have you come to the front. And he comes to the front because he missed church that morning. And he takes communion, and what at Churches of Christ, you do communion, then you do what? Offering, right? So they didn't pass the plate. If you're in front communion, they hit you up to pass the plate. And so he had $20 in his pocket. That's all the money he had to his name, and he needed to, that $20, there's to get across the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, it's a $10 toll, and he needed to put $10 of gas. That is the money he needed to get home. And he took that $20 that he needed for his toll and his gas money, and what did he do with it? He put it in the offering plate. Now, is this an unavoidable problem? Can this problem be fixed? It may hurt your pride, right? You can pull someone aside. Hey, well, first of all, it's embarrassing. Hey, I spent my last $20 in the offering plate. Well, why did you do that, right? That's what we may say. Like, this is embarrassing. I was embarrassed. It was awkward. You can just imagine all the scenarios. And so it was just kind of like, hey, I feel like I should give this, and so I'm going to. And I don't know how I'm going to get home tonight, but we'll figure it out when we get there. And as he was leaving church that day, someone gave him, I don't know if it's $20 or more. Some people occasionally just hand money to Bible college students. Not a lot, but enough. And so, like, he was in a position, I can either trust God to provide for my basic needs, transportation and home, or I don't have to. But when he did God take care of him? Yeah. It's amazing if most of us are in the position to never have to really get down to where it's like that desperate. But if you start digging for these stories, you can. I read about a man named Lindsay Heyman. Lindsay, I guess in the UK, can be a man's name as well. And he has this unique ministry that he had for years and years. That he had a 12-foot cross that he would carry all across Europe. And if you see someone carrying a 12-foot cross, it's a great conversation starter, isn't it? Why are you carrying that cross around? Glad you asked. It's because I believe in Jesus, and it's called street evangelism. There's a guy in Xenia that does this. Have you ever seen the guy in Xenia carrying the cross around? Now, he's not exactly carrying his cross, because at the base of the cross is a little wheel, so he's wheeling his cross. And the first time I saw that, I said, hey, Jesus tells you to carry your cross, not wheel your cross. And Micah exploded laughing. This guy was wheeling his cross around. All right, and so he tells some interesting stories. In the UK, they use pounds and not dollars. And one day he was down to his last 40 pounds, and he said, you know what? What I need to do is, for part of my street evangelism, I have this pamphlet I need to print. And it's going to cost $40 for me to print a run of these pamphlets. It's going to cost me every last dollar that I have. And most of us would say, hey, if we're a good planner, we're going to wait to print those until we can afford it. But he felt convicted that I should print these now. And then tomorrow I will have how much money? 0. And then God is going to figure it out. The next day he got a unexpected tax refund in the mail. The day after he printed those, how much do you think it was for? 40 pounds. 40 pounds exactly. Which if you are willing to trust God to provide for whatever it is you need, and we're talking money here, but it could be a lot of different things. The question is, like Elijah, do you trust that he'll take care of you? Because if you give him the opportunity, he's given a track record. This same guy was in Romania. When I say he traveled all over Europe, he traveled all over Europe. And he had a house lined up to stay in. He was going to stay with someone that he knew in the area, but that fell through. And so he was walking around with a 12-foot cross and not a place to stand, not a place to go. He did not know where he was going to lay his head that night. Someone drove by, an American who was visiting Romania, and had this wad of Romanian money, which to convert it back into American dollars seemed like too much of a hassle to him. So he asked to roll down the window, pulls up, "What are you doing?" "I'm carrying this cross around telling people about Jesus." The guy handed him the Romanian money that was left. The guy checked into the hotel room. I went to a hotel, said, "How much is it a room?" There's a room to stay there that night. And the exact amount of money that he had was what? Cost of the room that night. And it's what's interesting about Lindsay is he said, "I'm not a person of faith, or I'm not a person who really just is like makes these huge leaps for God. But he says, I am. He says, provision happens so often that you can't explain it away. And so the conclusion that I sort of drew from that is we have to allow God. We have to open ourselves to those situations and scenarios, and it may not be money, it may be something else. It's like, God, if I do what you ask, the only way that this situation gets resolved is if you act. And God has a track record of when we kind of show that kind of faith, that kind of dependency, that he's willing to do that. There's one more story like this. It was about a man that moved from the UK to Zimbabwe when he was 17, and he had a international student visa, but he didn't qualify for student loans, but there was a limit to how much money he could make to keep the student visa. And so this poor guy, his name was Tinde Chetsi. He was from Zimbabwe. He ended up in the UK. He basically had no money. And so he had no social life. And he was at church one day, and he had 1 penny left in his pocket. And there's that story in the Bible about like the widow who had 1 penny left, and she put it in the treasury at the temple. And he was inspired by that, and he said he put it in an envelope because he was embarrassed to put 1 penny in the offering plate. And so he did. He had nothing. I am not a person who if someone says to me, God spoke to me and told me this, all right, in this way, I'm not a person who initially says, oh, really? Tell me a lot more about that. Of course God spoke to you and told you something. my initial response is, I'm a little bit suspicious. But, and you can take this story, we have to trust what this young man said as true. Maybe it's not. The principle still applies. He had been praying for 15 to 20 minutes, and he said, God, I need you to take care of me. I literally have nothing to my name. I have a place to lay my head. My tuition's covered, but I have nothing. And he said that God spoke to him and said, you're going to get a check for 800 pounds. I don't know what that converts to in dollars. In the mail tomorrow. You're going to get it, and you need to give half of it to Sarah. I said, okay. So he went and checked his direct deposit, his bank account, and someone had deposited $800 in it, and then he removed the 400 of the 800 and gave it to Sarah and said, she's like, are you trying to deposit that? He said, no, there's a note that explains everything. And I don't know could that be all a story? I guess. He says that experience made my faith grow. I'm not concerned by hardship. I don't spend time worrying about what might go wrong because I've seen it and I've been there and I was fine. God was with me. I will always draw on that experience and encouragement to step out, to do things out of the norm, that require you to believe that God can do something impossible. And so I know that kind of faith, dependence on God for whatever it is that we need, is something that God calls us to have. It's something that Elijah had. And it would be easy to say, well, Elijah was a prophet of God. He lived in amazing times. He did amazing things. But James says, the book of James tells us Elijah was what? A man just like us. So whatever it is that is in our lives that we have to depend on God for, we have to be willing to do it. I would point out, too, that something I've missed in this story. God told the widow, some prophet's going to come to you, and he needs to stay at your house. She may or may not have believed in the God of the Bible, and it required a deal of faith on her part because she had like some water, and back then a widow was like the most destitute person in the social construct. Orphans and aliens or sojourn, like people moving from out of the country, and widows. Those three were together. A widow is not the sort of person who say, you know what, I'm in need of help, and so I need you to help me. They were the widows were the people that had nothing. And so he asks for water, and what does she do? Gives him water in the middle of a drought. He then says, and while you're at it, will you cook me up a loaf of bread? And what does she say to him then? I've got nothing left. I was just about to cook this handful of flour and the little bit of oil I have left. That is literally all we have left. And I was going to cook it so after we ate it, my son and I could do what? Die. And one of the things I was thinking about is this widow, we usually think of, no offense to any of the widows here, we usually think of widows as like older ladies, right? It's generally the case. But the average life expectancy in Jesus' time for a male was about how old? Do you know? Take a guess. 35? Pretty close. 29. So it seems to me like if this widow she's taking care of her son, he's not the kind of son that exists now that is sort of playing video games and eating Cheetos in the basement in his late 20s, right? This could be a kid she's taking care of. She could be a younger woman, and it says, me and my son are about to die. He says, well, God's going to make you this promise. God's made you a promise that if you trust him, he will take care of you. And she trusts him too. Which, the amazing part of that story, the most amazing part of that story may not be Elijah's trust of God, it may be her trust of God. And so if we want to be like Elijah, we look at the story of him living. We don't know how long he lived in Zarephath before this next thing happened, but it's a pretty amazing thing. We need to trust God too. Then something happened that takes things up a notch, so to speak. In verse 17, this is what happens. We're going to read down through the end of the chapter. After this, the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became ill. So this boy becomes ill. And his illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him, which was one way to say that he was what? Dead. Which is kind of cruel. He survives the danger of hunger, but then dies of this other illness. And she said to Elijah, "What have you against me, O man of God? You have come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to cause the death of my son." And he said to her, "Give me your son." And he took him from her arms and carried him to the upper room where he lodged and laid him on his own bed. And he cried out to the Lord, "O Lord my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I sojourn by killing her son?" When tragedy strikes us, no matter how great or small, we like to ask what question? Why did this happen? So she assumed, well, the reason my son died is because Elijah is here and God is punishing me. Elijah's assumption is that what happened to the boy? God killed him. And so he keeps praying. He says, then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and said, "O Lord my God, let this child's life come into him again." And the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child came into him again, and he revived. And Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper chamber into the house and delivered him to his mother. And Elijah said, "See, your son lives." And the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth." One of the things that I realize about the Bible is just because a prophet says something doesn't mean that they're necessarily right. And so Elijah may have said, "Well, God, it seems to me that you killed her son." Just because that's what Elijah thought, does that mean that's what's true? No, Elijah could be wrong. And so one of the things that we need to realize is, because as different as this woman's situation is from and Elijah's situation is, there are some things that are universal, and that is, what does God want from this unfortunate situation? What was his purpose here? Why did this happen? These are conversations that I have every day not every day, frequently with people, and things we think about. And so as we consider that, because all of us have probably at some point asked the question, why to God? The first thing we need to realize is there's a difference between God causing something to happen and permitting something to happen. So if with the widow and with ourselves, we should ask, is this something that God caused to happen or something that God allowed to happen? Now, that's not to say that God doesn't cause bad things to happen to people. And if that's the question, we should ask, well, why is that the case? Sometimes God does cause bad thing to happen in response to people's wickedness. For example, in the book of Genesis, it says that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of his thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. It says it was so bad, God regretted even making human beings. So he sent a flood that wiped out all but 8 people known as family off the face of the earth. Did God cause that flood? That bad thing to happen? Absolutely he caused it. Why did he do it? Because his sense of justice was violated in just an obscene way. It was important to note that God did not arbitrarily decide to wipe people out. It was his justice which was in response to man's wickedness. If you look pretty much closer to Elijah's lifetime, God moved Assyria and Babylon, those empires, to oppress God's people because of their unfaithfulness and idolatry. If you look at Hebrews chapter 12, we're not going to read it, but it says word for word, but I'll just kind of paraphrase. It's like, hey, some of the stuff you're going through is because God is disciplining you, because you're his children. And if God didn't discipline you, then you really wouldn't be his child. And discipline, by its very nature, is unpleasant. The exact words are, it's painful rather than pleasant. Do you ever, when you're raising your kids, did they ever complain that their disciplines were unenjoyable? I don't like staying in timeout. I don't like it when you take my video games away. I can imagine to my dad says, Dad, I don't like it when you spank me because it hurts. And that's the point exactly, isn't it? Like it's to teach you to do or not do something. And so there are times when maybe God does do something. There are things that God allows to happen, which they may be the natural consequences to some choices we make, whether good or bad. When my kids get ready for school, there's a lot of stuff that they need to, well, not a lot of stuff. They think it's a lot of stuff. They need to remember their book bags, which they always remember. They need to also remember their lunch boxes. One of my kids is in band, so that child must remember their instrument. One of my children is in gym. It's Micah. Micah's junior high kids are in gym class, so they need separate gym clothes. All right? Now, apparently some of the junior high boys just leave their gym clothes in their locker, and the clothes that they were gym clothes that they were wearing in January are the same clothes that they're wearing at the end of March. It's never been washed. Ryan, does this happen with? Now, I can't. Now, in fairness to Micah, he does bring his clothes home when he's done with them. The key is and we always remind him, pack your gym clothes. They're in a little drawstring bag next to his book bag, but sometimes he forgets. Sometimes the kids forget their lunch. Sometimes the band equipment gets left behind. Now, do I always say, tough luck, buddy. You forgot your lunch. I can't do anything about it. You're just going to have to struggle. Sometimes I say, you know what? What I'm going to do is I'm going to make an extra trip and take it back to them. Sometimes that happens, and guess what? They're not the only kids it happens. Usually I do it. There's a pile of book bags there. There's a pile of gym clothes. There's a pile of lunches. There's a pile of instruments. All right? It's the human condition. But sometimes I say, you know what? They're going to have a difficult conversation with their teacher about why they don't have their band with them. Micah may have to do gym in his uniform clothes, and they may have to, the lunches, school lunches, that they just don't like, they may have to eat today. And they find themselves in that predicament. Who caused that predicament? Me or them? They did. All I was doing was allowing it to happen. If you're not paying attention, this is what's going to happen. And so when we are dealing with adversity in our life, we may have to stop and think, hey, could God be causing this as a discipline? Yes. Could God just be allowing this to happen, and this is the natural sort of consequences of choices I've made? Yeah. Sort of the third option is like, the choices that we make just don't impact ourselves, they impact other people. And so there's times when like the person I'm around could be a stranger, could be a family member. I may have to suffer the choices, the impact of the choices they make. I think the point often when this is talked about in the Bible, and if you read the book of Job, when we try to explain or understand these things, or we give a definitive explanation for why X, Y, Z happen in our life, the book of Job tells us we don't really know for sure. And so we should be open to all the possibilities, but our first response should not be, well, God did this, God hates me, God's punishing me, because that's not the case. And if he has put adversity in our life, it's not for negative, it's to redeem us. And so next time we ask the question why, like Elijah and the widow here did, we can maybe have those things in mind. Any thoughts or questions? Any prayer requests on Facebook that we got during our Sunday school time? Let's close in prayer then. Dear God, thank you so much for taking care of us and listening to us when we call out to you. I pray that if and when we ask the question why, it is done so grounded in a profound trust of you, because your love for us is so complete. It's been proven and demonstrated. And so I just pray that we have the faith to trust it. So give us strength and wisdom each day. It's in your son's name I pray. Amen.